Hey, what's up everybody? This is an update to my optics video that I made shortly before the wipe hit that discussed a bunch of the details surrounding the first phase of the optics rework. Now I say first phase because Nikita said shortly after the patch that this batch of updates to optics was basically a first pass and more changes are to come. Now he had said this in a response to a Reddit post that was created by this guy, who was, as we were to find out, the creator of these leaked screenshots I discussed in the last video. Interestingly enough, while we were to find out that these images were not fake, they weren't actually real, at least in any meaningful sense. These are screenshots taken from within a modded, single-player, unofficial version of the game that's endorsed in no way by BSG, and unfortunately not something that we're going to have access to in the normal game itself. Now, I'm no expert, and honestly I don't care what you do with your free time, but I do have to say for my peace of mind that I'm fairly certain that running the single-player modded version of Tarkov is against the Tarkov Terms of Service, so caveat emptor. Now, not long after the patch hit, it became pretty clear that we didn't quite get what we were hoping for. The overall response was mixed, although tended to sway towards the negative side. The purpose of this video is to go through all of the 15 optics I discussed in the last video, compare each from before and after the rework, and share my feedback, some objective and some subjective, about the ways in which these changes in each case may have been good or bad. Hopefully this will help you get an unbiased look at the current state of optics in Escape from Tarkov, the results of the first pass of the rework, and serve as a point of reference for Battlestate to use when working on future optics updates. Let's jump into it. All of these comparisons are going to be following the same format. The top row is going to show the optic before the rework, and the bottom row showing the optic after the rework. When doing these comparisons, I'm going to be keeping 5 things in mind. How has the size of the sight picture changed from before and after? How has the clarity of the optic been affected, which can include things like the design of the reticle, the eye relief, any blurriness, or anything like that? How faithful both examples are to the best representation I could find of the real-life counterpart, which I'll be referring to simply as realism. How the overall usability of the optic, in my opinion, has changed in either direction. And then I'm going to be providing an overall score based on all of the combined criteria. Now I'm going to be keeping a sort of running score throughout these comparisons based on the overall score for each optic, ranging from a -2, which I consider a big step in the wrong direction, all the way up to a +2, which I consider a big improvement. Now this will hopefully give us a general idea for the first pass of the rework overall. Maybe something in the future we'll be able to compare against. Now starting off in no particular order, let's take a look at the Leopold Mark IV HAMR. You might not realize it, but the resulting sight picture is actually 2% smaller after the update. It just happens to look much more clear because of a drastic reduction in the shadowing around the outside of the scope due to improved eye relief. Comparing both what we had before on the left to what we have after on the right, to one of the best representations I could find of what the Mark IV HAMR looks like in real life, this particular change was definitely in the right direction in terms of realism, although I'd personally want to keep turning that dial just a little bit more. While not perfect, this was definitely a step in the right direction, and as such, the usability is better than it was before. So overall, I would say this was a welcome improvement to the HAMR, and I'd like to see something a little bit more drastic in the future. Up next is my personal favorite, the EOTech VUDU. Now this one comes sort of in stark contrast to the last one. For starters, this beautiful, huge, clear sight picture saw a 37% decrease in size. Now, along with that, the blurry kind of shadow around the edge of the scope, which I'm just now for simplicity's sake going to refer to as eye relief, might actually be a little bit smaller than before, but appears more significant just relative to the smaller size of the sight picture in general. It just seems more noticeable. Comparing each to the real-life counterpart, it honestly seems like what we had before was a lot closer to the real thing. So overall, I would say that this feels like a decline in realism. Now that being said, in the context of usability, I still think that the VUDU in its current state is probably one of the best optics in the game. Other than the fact that the 1X is closer to an actual 1X, I don't think it quite looks as good, but honestly I don't think the functionality really changed much, so I'm going to keep this neutral. Overall, I just honestly don't really see the purpose of these changes. The VUDU never really needed a change. Nobody asked for the VUDU to be changed, and it's not like it made a huge step in the right direction in terms of realism. It could have made the magnification, the 1X setting, closer to 1X without shrinking down the sight picture and adding more of the eye relief kind of blur around the edges. I think a lot of the nicer optics in the game should be modeled after the old version of the VUDU. It really is a much closer representation to some of the really awesome optics you can get in real life. Alright, moving on to another one of the favorites is the Valday PS320. Now, in terms of size, the sight picture was reduced 15%. And to go along with that, the really nice, large, clear picture was replaced with a smaller and more shadowy one. Now, this particular sight was one that I really couldn't find a real-life example of, so I honestly can't say if this was an improvement in terms of realism, one way or the other. Now, I do know that Russian optics tend to be notorious for having lower quality glass and components, so perhaps this is more realistic, that the eye relief would be kind of, I don't know, sketchy like this. So again, I don't really know. I'm just going to leave this as a question mark for now. Overall, the Valday is still usable, but I definitely think that it's not as usable as it was before the rework, simply due to the shadowing caused when you move the rifle around, which is something common to optics as you come in and out of the proper eye relief. It's just unfortunate that there's really no way of controlling the eye relief. You're kind of just at the whim of whatever your character does. Although it's hard to say if what we're left with now is the result of poor quality control on the side of Battlestate or on the side of Russian optics manufacturers. Perhaps you guys in the comments can link me to any examples of a scope like this in real life. Alright, moving on to the ELCAN Spectre. This was an interesting one because almost unanimously everybody seemed to feel like the ELCAN got buffed. Even I thought this. And my guess is that's probably due to it being mounted relatively closer to your face, increasing the sight picture by 8%. Now, interestingly enough, what you would think would be an improvement to the eye relief seems to have contributed to the addition of the famous shadowing around the outside of the scope. Now, every time I saw a version of the ELCAN in real life, it always had a really nice big field of view, clear of any sort of weird artifacting. So even though the overall size of the sight picture grew a tiny bit, overall I would say that it was more realistic before the rework. And I'm hoping in the future that we're going to see the sight picture increase in size on screen and move back towards a nice, clear sight picture. Now, honestly, these changes don't make a huge difference in terms of usability, so I'm going to keep that neutral. But I will say that overall, I think that this was a step in the wrong direction. Moving on to the SIG Bravo 4, this is another interesting example. Even though it appears that the optic has been moved further away from your face, whatever that giant band of shadowing around the housing that was there before is no longer there, which means that we have an 8% increase in the overall size of the sight picture. Without the dark ring around the outside, the clarity of the scope has improved drastically. It's always a little bit of a challenge to get an idea for the real-life sight picture and eye relief, but from all the examples I found, it looks like this latest iteration of the SIG Bravo is now much closer to its real-life counterpart. I think the only tweak they'd need to do to take it to the next level would be to decrease the size and thickness of the reticle. Now, all of these things add up to what is effectively a much more usable sight, something I'll probably be using a lot more often. So overall, I feel like this was a significant step in the right direction. Alright, moving on to the Monstrum Compact Prism. Honestly, not a whole lot has changed here, so I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. We saw a 6% increase in the size of the sight picture, although with this came the addition of some shadowing. It is quite subtle, but still noteworthy. Both seem to be fairly accurate representations of their real-life counterpart. And due to how subtle the changes are, there's really not much of a difference in the usability. Overall, I'd say the impact of this change was negligible. Alright, now we'll look at the EOTech HHS-1. To be honest, I'm not sure really what the hell happened here. The eye relief appears to have gotten worse with a 9% decrease in the size of the sight picture and some blurring added around the edges, but it does appear as if the reticle itself was shrunk down to a more realistic size. Now, when compared to the IRL version of the same scope, this seemingly random combination of changes doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so I don't really know what to say about it here. Overall, I still consider the magnified setting for this scope to be fairly unusable, and overall I'd say that this was a small step in the wrong direction. Alright, let's move on to another quick one, the Burris Full Field Tac 30. Again, not a whole lot changing here. There was just a really subtle 2% increase in the size of the sight picture. But for all intents and purposes, in terms of clarity, realism, and usability, this scope was, and still is, pretty damn good. Although personally, again, like the VUDU, I would like to see the size of the housing shrink a little bit and the sight picture increase in size, putting it more in line with the real-life counterpart. Not really much more to say. It doesn't really seem like there was that much of a difference here, so I'm just going to leave this one as neutral after the change. Now up next is the NC Star P4. Now this was a scope that not many people used before. Honestly, I think it's likely due to the design of the reticle. But here we can see more steps taken backwards by pretty much every metric. The sight picture was made 48% smaller, and the changes to the eye relief introduced the shadows around the edges that we know by now all too well. This was another example of a scope where I couldn't really find a great example of a video or a picture looking through the scope IRL, so for now this will have to remain a question mark. As we would expect for something that wasn't used a whole lot, it wasn't the most usable scope in the world, but these changes made it even less so, leaving us once again with a result that's significantly worse than where we started. Continuing to the Trijicon ACOG TA11D, we have a welcome set of improvements. There's been a 14% increase in the size of the sight picture, and improved eye relief means that the shadowing around the outside is pretty much entirely gone. While it doesn't quite yet boast the impressive field of view, as we would expect from its real-life counterpart, after the update this definitely is closer to the real thing. It's safe to say that these improvements have led to an overall more usable scope. I think we'll be seeing the ACOG a lot more, given that this was a major step in the right direction. I'll save us the time here and say that the other Trijicon ACOG, the model TA01NSN, saw an even more impressive 27% increase in the size of the sight picture and benefited in all the same ways as the previous, leading to one more big step in the right direction. Good job. Let's take a look at a quick comparison from before and after to the real-life counterpart. Now, before we continue to the last few sets of scopes, I do want to shout out my second YouTube channel that many of you might not be aware of, Veritas Music. This is my official artist channel where I've got pretty much all of my music, from lo-fi albums to the collaborations I did with Kit Boga, synthwave albums, a whole bunch of chill electronic video game inspired music, my album that I did literally covering a bunch of the Tarkov OST in lo-fi, as well as a whole bunch of playthroughs, multi-instrument playthroughs, drums, guitar, bass, everything from Pliny to Dream Theater, Rush, Guthrie Govan, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, intervals, everything. So one of the things I recently added was a 24/7 live stream where I'm going to be playing all of my music just all the time. It's lo-fi, electronic, prog rock, just chill stuff that you can listen to all day long if you're studying or driving to and from work or whatever. So go ahead, check out that stream, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, show me some love in the comments. I pretty much got this open all day and try to respond to as many people as I can. So show it some love, and hope to see you guys there soon. All right, back to the science. All right, looking at the primary arms compact prism, not a whole lot changed here other than a small 5% decrease in the size of the sight picture, with a slight decrease in overall clarity. While I would say that in real life the clarity is probably closer to what we had before, I would say that honestly both versions seem to be pretty fair representations of the real life counterpart. Overall, I don't think there was much of a change to the usability, and as such, don't really feel like there was much of a significant change overall. I think we can pretty much combine the last three: PSO scopes, the NPZ scope, and the KMZ. In some cases, the sight picture grew a little bit in size, in other cases it shrunk, and we saw subtle changes to the clarity and eye relief go both ways. These changes were rather insignificant, and in terms of realism and usability, honestly, there wasn't really a significant difference between any of them. The PSO still remains a good option, albeit fairly inflexible, attached to rifles with dovetails for mid-range combat, and the other two remain pretty clunky and relegated pretty much only to scav runs. I was hoping we'd see some improvement to these as well, but honestly, I'm having a hard time thinking about tons of use cases where I'm going to be using these over some of the other more common, accessible, and affordable options. So, there you have it. That's all 15 of the scopes before and after the optics rework. I have to say that I am slightly disappointed for the end result. There were a bunch of moves in the right direction, but also a bunch of moves in what seems to be the wrong direction. From pretty much any perspective, whether you're coming at it from the side of game balance, realism, trying to fight against one meta or another, or perhaps consistency, I'm not sure this batch of changes really hit the mark. I'm hopeful that future iterations of the optics rework will take more steps in the right direction, and I'm hoping that some of the feedback I've provided here can help. As usual, if you guys like this kind of content and want to see more, it really does help more than you guys know if you like the video. Leave a positive comment for the algorithm, and a lot of you have been saying that you don't see my videos anymore in your subscription feed, so I would highly recommend hitting the notification bell so that when videos like this come out, you'll know. Hope everything is going well with all of you guys both in and outside of the game, and I'll see you soon.